All right, and we are back. Welcome in to another episode of Keeping Up with the New York Jets alongside Teddy Pristash. I am Blake Pace. Today is Thursday, March 21st. Happy opening day of March Madness. I think this is undoubtedly outside of football season, some of the best fun sports days to look forward to. So enjoy your opening weekend of March Madness. We got a really fun episode coming today. Joe Douglas has showed up to the second wave of free agency. We're going to talk about all of the signings, trades that he's made thus far. Get into another individual who made a visit to New York today when we're recording on Wednesday, and talk about how these recent moves affect the upcoming NFL draft. Before we get to all that, make sure to follow us on our socials at KUWTNYJ. That's correct. I had to double check just to make
Nailed
sure.
it.
Teddy is at Teddy Huncho. I am at Spring Blake with 4 A's in there. Young Theodore, how are you doing today?
Doing good, man. Doing good. It's been a fun week. I'm excited about March Madness. When this is coming out, I'm taking a half day. Gonna get off right at
Nice.
12 and just watch the games all day, which is exciting. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, been a fun week in Jets land. I've spent the majority of the off season so far like pretty down and just kind of like kind of whatever happens, we're just kind of running it back, same as we did last year. It's going to be hard for me to like get that juice going again and get really excited and get me to buy in. And this last week kind of got me there, like, I mean, it's still obviously not perfect. There's still a lot of question marks, just like there are every year. But this last week, we'll get into the moves, but it got me hyped as hell. And I'm right there being just back into being like, let's fucking go. We're Super Bowl contenders again, which maybe is a little bit of a step too far, but who gives a fuck?
No, my favorite thing is last week we both were kind of just like, yeah, okay, this is what we've expected so far out of free agency. And by the end of this week, which was way more eventful, um, I could just feel the trap again for what we did the last few off
Sure.
seasons when we were like, whoa, Joe Douglas, look at you go. And
Yep.
granted,
Yep.
there is a chance that all of these moves over the last 3 years in the offseason, or at least some of them, hit every year, and then it all culminates into a great 2024 season. So I don't mean to come in and crash the dreams, but it was funny seeing all like the Tyron Smith, Morgan Moses, Mike Williams, Jadeveon Clowney's
Right.
visiting, like, whoa, look at Joe Douglas go. And it's like, well, we've been doing this for a few years now. We've gotten ourselves excited the last few free agencies. So
Sure. Sure.
I'm also like I just need to see all of these players on a field together before I'm gonna be like, this is fucking awesome. But let's get into them. I think the big one, obviously the offensive line, those two additions, trading for Morgan Moses, signing Tyron Smith, are the big ones because the offensive line has been a mess for the last few years. We've brought in guys, signed guys, drafted guys. It really hasn't worked out. And we went into this offseason saying we needed to replace three starters along the offensive line. You cut Lake and Tomlinson, you signed John Simpson a week ago, and you're like, okay, he needs a really good left tackle around him to probably be a good guard. And then here we go. This first one, we signed Tyron Smith to a 1 year, 6.5 million guaranteed contract. A ton of incentives that could boost it all the way up to $20 million. Teddy, was this like a Friday night, Saturday night type deal? I'm trying to remember when it came out, but it was like a late night on the weekend, and I was just like, this just came out of nowhere. Like I knew we were waiting on it. We knew the Jets were going to be looking at it.
Yep.
It almost seemed like he was going to go back to Dallas, and then the news pops, and you're like, wait a minute. We have a left tackle for the 2024 season, and it's a well-established veteran and probably one of the best left tackles over the last decade when he's on the field.
Yeah, I don't remember the exact day, but definitely just like happened. I think you sent me the text as most of the time. That is how I hear the news because you always beat me to it. Um, but yeah, this was a huge one. And when we go back to last week when we had signed John Simpson, that move got a lot of flack. And people were just like, what are the Jets doing? Like they're just sitting here. And our kind of take on that was really just, you know, it would be one thing if all of the other players had been signed, but they weren't, And so to be here a week later and say, hey, we did get Tyron Smith, who a lot of guys had as the top tackle in the class. I mean, it's exciting. And for me, like just comparing it to in years past, where it felt like we were taking chances at guys with maybe somewhat similar profiles of just like a pretty good career, solid career. But, when we signed not Morgan,
Dwayne
when we
Brown.
signed Dwayne Brown, he was 38 years old, right? And he had a great year for us. And then the next year, didn't really do much. And it was just like, yeah, all right. Like he was 38, it ended up working out. When you look at this, like this is still a 34-year-old guy, you know, um, and for it to be so incentive driven, it's basically completely driven by playing time, which is great when you're worried about potentially having to deal with injuries. If he gets injured, you pay less. If he plays up to the ability of being a starting left tackle all season, then he gets paid more, and that's kind of a perfect way for it to work. This was a big one. We're going to talk about our whole offensive line and talk about, I think it's obviously super important. Like none of this is set in stone. These guys aren't going to guaranteed be as good as they were in previous years. They're going to have to mesh. You might have injuries, blah, blah, blah. But when you do compare it to, say, a Mekhi Becton, who you had wanted to see be good for so long, but it really had never culminated. Like this is not that situation, right? This is a guy who's been to the Pro Bowl 8 times, who dealt with some injuries last year, played in 13 games, but still made second team All Pro. Like this is a guy who has been one of the best left tackles in the league for a decade now. And I think still has some years left. I don't think it's like we're signing a guy who's just going to completely fall off the cliff. So this one's huge. I love it, and it's a great anchor, especially when you have a guy like John Simpson next to him. It really is solid.
Yeah, that's a mean duo on the left side now. Like John Simpson saves you a physical motherfucker, aggressive play style, Tyron Smith just
Mm-hmm.
as well. So those two, are going to bring, and we'll talk the combination of this offensive line and what it means overall. Like I get excited about Brees Hall running behind these five guys. Like that is so exciting.
100%.
But, my big takeaway last week was that I thought, okay, you got John Simpson there. You need a good tackle next to him. I was like, put AVT at left tackle just because he's the only guy that I know is good on this roster right now. Like, and he's good at a guard
Sure.
position, he's good at a tackle. So I was like, put him out to the left side. Now Tyron Smith in. It's crazy to say that you are going to play a guy as talented as him at right guard, but that seems to be the plan. And look, if your right guard is AVT and Morgan Moses, it's a pretty strong right side as well too. So to me, it's like,
Yep.
was that necessarily perfect scenario? I was like, cool, yeah, if you can get all these guys in here, AVT can play right guard and he'll do perfectly fine. But now you're in a position where that actually can happen because Joe Douglas was able to go and get this done with a contract that, like you said, is team friendly up front. And if it's player friendly at the end, it also helps out the team because he's been a good left tackle for the Jets. They're winning playoff games. I think he gets $1 million or something in there for every playoff win they get as
I think
well
it's
too.
2,500 or
Oh, okay.
250,000
250,000
for
per playoff
every
win. That's
win.
right. He could
Can
get
be
a
up to a
million
million if you win them all.
if you win them. So yeah, I think it's great. It is going to minimize, like, now you don't need John Simpson to be this like otherworldly talent at left guard. You just
Yeah.
need him to go out there and maul, and he'll do well next to Tyron Smith. And like you said, things can happen. Tyron Smith could just, deal with injuries like he has the last 4 seasons. And really, if you go back to 2016, he's missed at least 3 games in every season. 2 games in 2020 he played 4 in 2022. So it hasn't been perfect by any means, but you are
Yep.
getting a guy that when he's on the field, he is an impact player. And like you said, I thought he was a little bit older. I was misjudged on that. Like 33, 34 by the time the season rolls around. Give me that because he is amazing. He's a great left tackle.
Sure. Sure. Yeah, and I think a lot of times you don't think you're gonna get like the top free agent, I
No,
guess. And so you sit there and you look at this list and you're kind of like, all right, Tyron Smith, he's a Pro Bowler, he's been in it, obviously has some injury concerns, but that seems like the best guy. And then you have a lot of just names almost that are, there's obviously other good players out there, but whether it's the money or whether it's just they're not all that great and it's going to be a giant question mark. And you're like, yeah, I guess we're going to roll into the season with this guy as our tackle. Like that totally could have happened. And for them to grab a guy like Tyron Smith and, coming off a few days after they had traded for Morgan Moses, like those are two very solid tackles that immediately give you confidence. Like, you know, if you want to be worried about injury, obviously that is a concern for every player, right? But
Mhm.
when you're just looking at how talented these guys are, those are two solid players. And I do want to talk about Morgan Moses for a little because this deal happened first, right? And he's a right tackle. It'll make sense for him to play right tackle. So we trade for him. Um, it was a fourth round pick swap, and I think we gave a sixth. Is that correct? Something like that. But this is an awesome, awesome move. I think Morgan Moses was a Jet in 2021. That next offseason, a lot of people just kind of penciled him in as we're going to bring him back and he'll be our right tackle. It never came to fruition. He ended up signing with the Ravens. Um, and we had signed, I think, then Dwayne Brown, which ended up working out. But it was this big kind of like all until Morgan Moses had got signed, everyone was just like, oh, the Jets are going to bring him back. Like, that's what's going to happen. And then I think he just got more money elsewhere and dipped. Um, and he went on to play 2 great years with the Ravens. Like, they have had a solid offensive line. You know, we talked about how John Simpson was the weakest link. So Morgan Moses at least was the second. You know what I mean? Like, he at least wasn't the worst. That's a positive. But no, he's been solid. And to add both of these guys, like, you know, you almost didn't think the Jets were going to be able to address the offensive line, especially their tackles, as well as they did. And to see them add these two guys, it just is like this huge sigh of relief because it at least takes so many question marks over just the ability of who we're going to be putting out there, you know, to start the season.
Yeah, and this was the one that, when I thought of the approach, like you said, you don't think you can get all the guys in there, but you forget that you can also trade for guys. And to me,
Sure.
I saw so much bad offensive line play last season across the league that I was like, if teams have good offensive linemen, they're going to want to keep them around. And obviously, in free agency, if you've got a guy and Robert Hunt's getting 100 million offered to go play guard in Carolina, Miami's not going to offer that or match that. It just doesn't make sense to in the open market. But if you have guys that are under contract, you're like, well, wouldn't we keep them around? Fortunately, Baltimore always has a plan. They are thinking like 4 years in advance. They already have their upcoming right tackle and left guard replacements for John Simpson and Morgan Moses. So we get the luxury of doing like hey, yeah, Morgan Moses is getting older. We have this guy in the waiting. Let's do a little pick swap here and get him sent back to New York, a place that he had, good things to say about too in his tenure there, which was Robert Saleh's first season as head coach. So he's back in the fold now. And, you know, uh, he's older, but man, he's reliable as
Also
fuck.
34.
He's reliable as fuck. And even he was talking with press this week and mentioned he tore his pec in week 4 and just played the entire season through it. So it's a guy that is a certified baller. He wants to be out there playing football. Um, there was always frustrations when I think of and I hear that sentiment. I remember people thinking that, there were times where Mackay maybe could have played games, but he was too on the fringe of like risking his body to play when he wasn't
Sure.
100%. You're not going to get that with Morgan Moses. If he is, like I said, torn pec and he played 13 straight games, like that's no joke. So you got a guy that wants to play out at right tackle. Like he's just reliable and a good dude. And you're taking from organizations here that, yeah, sure, they're letting those players go for a reason, but at the same time, Dallas and Baltimore have had two of the best offensive lines constructed of the last 10, 15 years when you think about all the pieces they have. So you're getting guys that hopefully can also be a little bit educational to some of the younger dudes that either are there already in Joe Tippmann AVT, or maybe if we draft somebody in the first couple of rounds in a month from now. So all in all, it's a great duo where, yeah, you had to spend money for Tyron Smith, but really, in the end of it, you didn't have to give up that much to bring in two solid vets to play a very important position for this team next year.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you look at this offensive line a week ago, you know, I guess 10 days ago before free agency, and we had been sitting here, we'd been like, all right, we got Titman, we got AVT, and we have no idea who the other three starters are going to be, you know, on this offensive line. And when you have that many holes, you don't think that it's going to be that easy to fill them. Now we're sitting here we at least got a starting offensive line. Tyron Smith, John Simpson, Joe Tippmann, AVT, Morgan Moses. That's solid, and obviously health comes into play. Obviously, you hope that they can keep their um, play up, and you hope that who's the Jets offensive line coach? Keith Carter. Everyone hates
Yes.
Keith Carter, so you hope that doesn't ruin everything. Um, but yeah,
Now,
I mean,
it was just Mackay that commented on it, right? Wasn't it just Mackay that commented on the post, or was there other guys that spoke? Because Taylor
yeah,
Lewan
but
posted about
Taylor Lewan
something,
has
but then
has
Mackay
has expressed
commented.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I
So
mean,
I
I
don't
think
know.
there's been plenty of
Yeah.
offensive linemen who have complained about him in the
It's
past,
such a
but
funny coaching staff because then also
I just wanted to get that little
Todd
jab in
Downing,
there.
the quarterback's coach, got like a DUI last season when he was or 2 seasons ago when he was the Titans. It's just
Yeah.
such a funny collection
Yeah.
of offensive coaches there. But you're right, he was another one that was getting some flack, and so you're right. Hopefully the players can overcome whatever Keith Carter might be putting
Yeah.
in front of them.
Yeah, and I still think like I want to see the Jets keep adding at O line. Like I want to see depth filled out and all that stuff. But first, for a starting lineup, like you got it, and that's really exciting. And I definitely think we felt decent about our offensive line last year, but it was just riddled with question marks. While there's still question marks here, I think they're much less, and much more injury centered. I guess like if the guys are out there playing, they're probably going to be pretty good, and that's an exciting. It's an improvement from where we were a year ago.
Yeah, because even last year it was injury, but then you also had to worry about the player. Was Mackay ever going to figure it out? Was Dwayne Brown going to fall
Sure.
off the cliff at
Was
39?
Lakin going to bounce back?
Exactly. Like
Like things like that.
it was availability and then also production. Like you had to question both.
Yep.
We at least know that these guys out here, barring the fact that this was it for them, that they are going to tail off in the
Sure.
2020. There's still a lot of months until we get to see another snap of football. But barring that, this we should feel a lot more comfortable about this offensive line. Makes me feel like you said, I feel like it's one of the best ones that I can remember for the Jets. You've been paying attention for a longer time than I have to them specifically, but I mean, on
Sure.
paper, fully healthy, it's a damn good offensive line, and I credit Joe for finding different ways to get it done, whether it be a trade or a free agency contract that is a little unprecedented. I don't think anybody's ever had 14 million potential in incentives. So he's been crafty in the way he's addressed the offensive line
Sure.
this offseason, which I appreciate.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, let's move it along then. I think the big one that kind of even just was like the oh shit again. Uh NYJ Matt signed Mike Williams to a 1 year, $15 million contract. No, I didn't know if
This
we
was
were ever
big. This
I didn't
was
know
big.
I didn't know if we were ever going to bring up the Matt fiasco that came on with the Taylor ham and egg cheese sandwich, but that was fun to be a part
Oh,
of
dude,
on
are you
Twitter. That was pretty
kidding me?
cool.
Of course.
That was a
Of
cool
course.
day.
It was the biggest story in football this weekend
Pretty
or this
cool.
the beginning of this week. No, it was funny, man. I mean, we went throughout the weekend, feeling pretty good about the offensive line. And my big question was like, all right, I mean, this receiver room has all of a sudden jumped up to being the number one need for the Jets. And, we had talked about the available guys last week. Um, and Mike Williams, he got released on Wednesday of last week, which is when we record. I don't think we knew at the time. It might have happened while we were recording, or maybe we just didn't see it and didn't bring it up. But there really wasn't a whole handful of guys
Mm-mm.
who like moved the
He
needle.
he
Hollywood
wasn't.
Brown signed with the Chiefs.
Yeah, when we recorded last week, he was not part of the free agent pool because we had the list of guys
No,
up and he
right.
wasn't on there. Yeah,
Yeah. He was released on the 13th, so it must have happened like
it was
what
the
like maybe
day
like
we no, it's the day we put
it
the
might have
show
got
out, or
announced.
yeah. Oh, I see what you're.
No, it was the day we recorded, yeah.
Oh, interesting.
But yeah, whatever we were looking at, we didn't have that information. But to me, like Mike Williams was the big potential guy that like actually felt confident about as a wide receiver too. And outside of that, I was like, Joe Douglas is hopefully gonna have to get you know, into the trade market somehow. And even that was like, how do you really see that going down? I don't think we're going to give up capital for T. Higgins, all these different things. And so, all week we're looking forward to Mike Williams. Originally, it was reported his meeting was on Monday. It was actually on Tuesday. NYJ Matt, star of Jets Twitter, sends him an egg sandwich. And then what do you know? 8 hours later, he signs with the Jets, 1 year, $50 million contract.
Not just that he signs it, he cancels all the rest of the meetings he had throughout the
I
week. He
That's where I was
cancels
just gonna go
Carolina.
next.
Like
Yes,
the Jets did not let him leave that building until there was a contract
sure.
signed and a breakfast sandwich inside his mouth.
Which I love, especially it's been like 2 to 3 years of known attempts by Joe Douglas to sign guys, and whether, guys chose other teams, chose more money, whatever the reason, it never was able to accumulate. And, don't get me wrong. I don't think Mike Williams is necessarily like a wide receiver one at all. But what he is a solidified star wide receiver two. And he's shown that, throughout his 8, 9 year career. I was definitely super worried because he had the three more teams, right? The 3 days after, or two more teams.
The Panthers were
And
definitely there. I don't know if it was the Ravens, if I'm confusing the Ravens with somebody else. It was definitely the Panthers, but I
yeah,
can't remember
yeah.
who else was there.
And at that point, a lot of times people love saying, don't let him leave the building. And for me, it's always like sometimes they just want to, they scheduled a meeting. They're going to go. Robert Saleh, like, we didn't want him to leave the building. He still went to Philadelphia the next day. He still visited with them and then made his decision for the Jets. So, like, whatever. But for Mike Williams to just come and Joe Douglas just get it done, super, super exciting news, I believe. And again, like I said, like, let's be clear, Mike Williams is not, going to come in and be better than Garrett Wilson. But when you look at last year when we were trying to get behind Alan Lazard, who was a solid player in Green Bay, it's not like he was bad, but he had never really taken that step. And you kind of were just hoping, like, yeah, he can be wide receiver too. That should be fine, especially with Aaron. This is a guy you absolutely know can be your wide receiver too. And I think pairs super well with Garrett Wilson on the other side. I'm unbelievably excited about this move.
Yeah, it's a dangerous combo. Mike Williams is a fantastic athlete. The problem over the last few years has been health, and that's something like every other player that we've been talking about. You are never going to have a guarantee, and you are going to lose guys throughout the course of a season. But if you have a guy that flashes that much potential in short time, like Michael Nani, I saw this off of Michael Nani's Twitter account. Last 17 games for Mike Williams, 91 catches, 1,263 yards, 6 touchdowns. Yes, that is sprinkled over the course of 3 seasons. His last 17 games, 16 of which were in one season, or sorry, 15 of which were in one season.
16 in the last two. He played
Well,
3 last year, 13 the year
three,
before.
13 before, and then the one in the, yep, you're right. Sorry, I got my numbers all mixed up. But like he's a legit dude. He's a great deep ball, 50-50 target, just a freak athlete. And I'm really
Sure.
excited to have him in here.
I do want to talk about the injury thing.
Yeah.
Mike Williams, because there's like two sides to the coin, right? On one side, Mike Williams' injury concerns and his mark of being like an injury prone player is grossly overstated, right? Like he missed time his first year, he played 10 games, but then you look, he played 16 games, 15 games, 15 games, 16 games, 13, and then 3 this last year with a torn ACL. So his injury, he hasn't missed as much time as I guess it feels like. The problem with Mike Williams is he's the kind of guy who every time he goes up for a catch and comes down, it looks like his every bone in his body broke, and he gets up really gingerly. And there's been plenty of games where he'll play and then get injured and come out. So it's not like, when you just look at the games played, you're like, oh, he actually has played a decent amount. You do have to remember in some regard, like there were games that he played and didn't finish. Um, but I try not to get too hung up on like injury prone guys, right? Like guys are injury prone until they're not. You just kind of have to hope for the best. Like what else are you gonna do? And yeah, Mike Williams is a stud. I mean, going back Obviously, 2022 was the last time he had almost a full season, played 13 games, 895 yards. Year before that was his best season, 100 or excuse me, 76 receptions, 1100 yards. Um, this is a guy who can certainly play. Like this guy rules. I've actually been a Mike Williams believer. I see you have a note on our doc that says I'm a Mike Williams hater,
You
which is
are.
bullshit. I'm a
You're a
hater
Mike.
because you have him on his fantasy team, and I don't think he's necessarily a great fantasy player
Yeah,
anymore.
no, you're a hater because I've tried trading him off to you 10 times and you're always like, yeah,
Yeah.
Fuck
If
Mike
you had caught me
Williams.
after his 2021 season, I was pretty in on him in 2022, and he kind of disappointed for fantasy there. Um, but yeah, he's a great player, dude. And this is awesome. And again, the wide receiver room was the clear number one concern after we had made the offensive line moves. And you look at um, the options, right? And even if you had been able to get a Tyler Boyd, even if you had been able to get, there was another name that was pretty common that's blanking me right now, but those guys were all right? Like I said last week, MVS, I'm okay with an MVS. That's a fine guy to have on your team. But none of those guys were really giving you any confidence in who your wide receiver two is going to be. And none of those guys were going to like fill out the room in a way that felt like it was adding a skill set, upgrading a position. This was really the one guy that was going to do that outside of maybe trade targets. And for the Jets to actually get this done, and now we're sitting here without even the draft happening, and our biggest holes of an offensive line and wide receiver two feel filled, to some degree. Like this last week, from where we stood of just being like, yeah, it's kind of a slow free agency. Like, what else did you expect? We did kind of turn it on its head, and all of a sudden, we're sitting here in a great spot going into the draft, really being able to do whatever we want because of how successful they were in filling these key holes, in the past 7 days.
Yeah, to me, at both positions, filled at least into the sense where we do not need to ask a rookie, whether it be a guy at pick 10 or a
Exactly.
trade back to like, we need you to go in and be our starting left
And be
tackle,
really
or
good.
we need
Yeah.
you to be our number two wide receiver from
Play
day
80%
one.
of
Like
snaps. Yeah.
we can be patient. We can do what we did last year with Will McDonald and Bryce Huff. Like we can just ease you in and pepper you in, and hopefully you can ascend if we ever need you later in the season if something happens. But like at least with the way this roster is set up, you are not going to be. And that's so important for a team like this that has a GM and a head coach that are entering in a make or break season for both of them, a 40-year-old quarterback that is trying to win another Super Bowl before his career is over.
Yep.
He doesn't want to have to rely on a rookie left tackle or a rookie wide receiver opposite Garrett Wilson. He needs guys that are there. And then later in the season, like the Chiefs last year, with like a guy named Rashee Rice. Like you can have that guy that, oh shit, he's figuring out at the end of his rookie season. He comes on now. He's this great receiving threat. Like it's so much easier than to just say day one show up, you need to be our guy. So this changes not
100%.
just the instant floor, but you can start to now be a little bit more selective in the draft. Like you said, you could sit at 10, you could take a guy, best player available, or you could trade back. There's a whole lot of things to do. And I think that's one of the things that we will eventually get to is talking about what you would like in the draft now and what I would like and
Sure.
what are the pros and cons. I do just want to say before we move off Mike Evans, if he
Mike Williams.
Mike Williams, sorry, if he does fall apart next season, you can blame Theodore Pristash. I have this August 8th, 2023. I tried trading Mike Williams to Theodore Pristash, and he goes, Mike Williams will be done playing football after this year, so I'm good.
All right. All right. Well, you're catching me. I'm either lying to you or I'm lying to the people,
Red-handed.
right? Yeah. I mean,
Oh, that's great.
I'll maybe say that him being on your
Look,
team made me be a little harsher than maybe I actually
yeah,
believe.
of course, of course.
But
It's I was trying to, just I was trying to get rid of him. I understood that it was
no,
a an
yeah,
asset.
certainly.
We're talking fantasy, which is not football. Fantasy is a very
Real
different game.
quick,
So, yeah.
watching the first four game Grambling State against Montana
How we
State right
doing?
now.
How we doing?
They
How
were
we doing?
down 11 at halftime. They're up
Yeah,
4. They just hit a 3. Grambling State's up 4. 3.5 minutes left. Still a lot to go. Blake and I got him plus four and a
plus
half.
4.5.
But yeah,
Love
we'll see what
that.
happens. God, I love
Nice.
the
Good
NCAA
intermission.
tournament.
You guys will
Yeah,
know if we won
yeah,
our bet by the time you're listening to this. Anything
100%.
anything else with Mike Williams? I just like to me, we talk about the importance of like a good tight end as a red zone threat. Like Mike Williams is such a great red zone threat with his ability to
Yeah,
get and high point the ball. He is great contested catches, 50-50s. Like I
yeah,
see just back of the end zone, touchdown, 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 touchdown when I think of Aaron Rodgers. Ball placement mixed with Mike Williams' talent. Like that to me is just a match made in
sure.
heaven.
I like to see the Jets, they struggled so much in the red zone last year, and just couldn't move the ball at all. It felt like anytime they got close, this is a guy who's just the perfect prototype to be a red zone, to be a red zone receiver. I also just like I could just see, Joe Douglas being at a press conference and we hadn't made a lot of moves at receiver and him just trying to be like, yeah, we got a lot of confidence in Xavier Gibson. We got a lot of confidence in Jason Brownlee. We think those guys and that's fine. Maybe those guys will break out, but like you can't, yeah, it would have been so unbelievably frustrating to have to be sold that, right? And then even if you do draft a receiver, to have to just expect them to be great right off the bat. This deal to me, it does a lot because it just solidifies the room. It gives anyone who does come in chance to just kind of ease into it, even if it is a Xavier Gibson and a Brownlee. It takes the pressure off everyone else when you have a guy like this who can just step in. We're not going to have to start Alan Lazard. A lot of positives from this move. So yeah,
Muted myself because
can't
my
hear
dog
you.
was being annoying.
There you go.
He's also due for 1 to 2 games a season that he just takes over. And you're like, holy shit, Mike
Scores three
Williams had
touchdowns.
8 catches for 165 and 2 touchdowns like he did in 2021
Yeah,
against the Browns. Like he always has that 1 or 2 games where it's like a takeover. Now, sometimes he'll follow that up the next week with a goose egg, but you are at least going to get that pop. And sometimes that pop comes in a game where you desperately need it. So he is a very volatile in terms of volume, but
sure.
he is a guy that can also just be like, nope, this is my game and you guys can't do anything about it. So it is a
Yep.
really, I can't say low risk, high reward because you're paying him 15 million, but high reward is the thing that we should be focusing on here with this signing because
Yeah.
we're in a position where we need high reward. We don't need to really worry about risk at this point. So yeah, those are the big ones. I think the only other move that we can talk about is today when we were recording this, Jadeveon Clowney visited New York to meet, and that would be exciting.
Yeah. Yeah.
Jadeveon
I would
Clowney,
be a
good
fan of
player.
this move.
You know,
Yep.
I would say another guy that early on in his career, I think he's been better about it recently. Early on in his career, injuries kind of hindered him after being a first overall pick with the Houston Texans a decade ago, which is crazy to think about. But over his last few stops, whether it be Cleveland or Baltimore, he has been a very reliable edge rusher. 9.5 sacks last season with Baltimore. A very good edge rusher and a guy that you can feel comfortable putting out against the run, getting to the quarterback. Um, we talked about how unfortunate it was and how bad of a look it was to lose a guy in Bryce Huff to free agency and get nothing in return. If the consolation prize is we use that money for Tyron Smith, Mike Williams, and Jadeveon Clowney, if it's dining gets done, I I kind of feel like it's worth it, especially with how this D line is utilized through Robert Salas. So take me through your thoughts, Jadeveon Clowney, what he could bring, and just what an impact that would be to it. To now, when you take a look at needs, you're almost like, well, the edge room probably needs a couple of guys in there. So this would kind of
Yeah.
go and fill
100%.
another hole. So
Yeah, I mean, Jadeveon Clowney is a guy who I think, some people like still think of him as a bust almost, just because he wasn't like that number one overall pick, like type of player right away. But yeah, he has gone from team to team over the last couple of years, or however long it's been, and has been really solid. And I think has been solid in positions where he has other elite players to lean on and take some of that, pressure off of him. And when you think about him, on the opposite side of a Jermaine Johnson with a Quinn and Williams in the middle, like all of a sudden that room's feeling really, really solid. And, similar to these other positions that we're talking about, you have uh, if you go in with the season the way it is now, then you're going to be sitting there hoping Will McDonald can step into a role and be great. Where if you can sign a guy like Jadeveon Clowney, that solidifies that edge room, takes pressure off Will McDonald. I'm frozen right now, so I don't know if you can hear me. Oh, hey, you're back. Let's go. Um, so yeah, I mean it that would be an awesome move, and the fact he's meeting there today, like I'd love to get off this podcast and see the news.
Yeah,
We'll obviously see. Maybe it won't be like what happened with Mike Williams, but I definitely think this should be a move that Jets fans are excited about because again, it's like all of a sudden edge kind of feels like a need, right? Like even if
definitely.
it's not signing a star, like I mean, Jadeveon Clowney kind of is a star though. 9.5 sacks, like that's a lot.
He's been up and down the last few years. I didn't realize he's been jumping around to teams since
Yeah,
2019.
he's a
So he
mercenary.
was with
Yeah,
he's a
that's what he is.
Seattle-based defense 4-3 mercenary is what he is. So he
Merchant.
went from merchant. He went
I'm saying
from
mercenary because he just goes from team to
I
team,
was
just
saying merchant because
he's a hired gun.
he just keeps following great defensive lines and just does his part. He was in after Houston,
Yeah.
he went to Seattle, Tennessee, Cleveland, Baltimore, all great defensive fronts, and he just goes in there and does his job. It's been up and down. He has a season that looks great, and then another one that falls apart, and then a season that looks really solid, and then another one the production falls apart. Couple years in there where you're like, okay, he didn't, play 10 games instead of 17. Okay, he's a little bit older. He's had injuries throughout his career, so not much you can do about that. But yeah, I think, in a situation here with New York, he's not going to be relied on a ton. He won't be needed to do everything and be out there every play, so that'll be better for him as he gets a little bit older. I'm sure he'll be, what, 31 by the time the season starts? Oh, he just turned 31. Happy belated, Jadeveon. But a guy that can be a high production sack guy, but is also big enough to hold his own against tackles versus the run. So, when you think of if Jermaine's the guy, if Jermaine is the almost three down player, the guy that is the number one edge, not necessarily he's always out there three, but is good, against the run and pass. And you think about what Will McDonald may not be ready for in his second season, he's a smaller guy. So you probably want a beefier veteran to kind of handle some of those run concepts early on, or you could put a John Franklin Myers back out on edge and kind of rotate all of those dudes in while Will is kind of just pin your ears back and get to the quarterback on third down. So really solid addition. If it can go through, I would love to see it. And it, like you said, it almost makes even edge now when you look at if they address it, late day 3 or late day 2 or anytime day 3, you aren't asking, like, Michael Clemens, you didn't ask him
Right.
like, oh, sudden we need you to be productive now. We've got guys in front of you that are both veterans and rising stars. The one thing I do want to say about Jadeveon Clowney, you guys need to hop off the fucking breakfast sandwich bandwagon. Do you see the Jets had to tweet out? They were like, "We appreciate you guys sending stuff here today, but can you
Oh,
can you just make can we just have made that a one-time thing?" Like the
I
Jets
know
account
people
tweeted
wanted to.
out and was like, "Can you please give this
Yeah,
to
I
food
saw.
shelters? Like give it to people who
Yeah,
need it." It was funny when one person did it, but now
yeah,
everybody's just trying to be like, I'm gonna clout
just
chase.
too
I'm gonna
much.
clout chase. Just let that
Yeah,
be a really cool moment and we'll just relax from now on.
yeah, I'm with you there. I'm sure the Jets staff and random people who work there got to eat some random food
Yep.
today.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely did. Um, anything else on Jadeveon?
No, I mean it would again like these moves, kind of unexpected for me when you look at them all as a whole with the O line and Mike Williams and are getting me bought back in. This would be another move where I'm really sitting there and thinking, man, this Jets team at least has to be pretty good next year. You know what I mean? And I'm scarred as hell from last year, and thinking that. But again, like even without this Jadeveon move, because obviously it hasn't happened yet or we don't know if it even will. Like, I truly do think these moves that we made like are a step above kind of where we were last year with those rooms, right? Like we signed Alan Lazard, which was exciting. I thought he was one of the better free agents available. Alan Lazard isn't Mike Williams. We had linemen We were hoping for him. Those linemen weren't the same linemen we have now. Like, I just definitely think Joe Douglas and his team, they at least put their money where their mouth is, right? And they went out and did improve the roster and did it pretty well, from a process standpoint. We'll see how it works out on the field, but I mean, I'm excited as hell. And if they could get Jadeveon Clowney in there as well, like I'm really fucking excited.
Feel pretty
So
good.
we
Feel
shall
pretty good
see.
moving in.
Yeah.
Yep. And yeah, I think we alluded to this before too, but this obviously does change the plans, or at least gives the flexibility to change the plans in the upcoming NFL draft. The Jets sitting with pick 10, that's a premium pick. And you no longer have to draft a wide receiver or offensive lineman or
Yeah.
even edge rusher and say, like, go be the guy. So where does your
I just
mind
want
go
to
now?
Yeah, I just want to like talk about my mindset, which I think is pretty consistent with all the Jets fans out there, right? And even non-Jets fans. Before any of this stuff went down, it was a locked and loaded 100% guarantee that the Jets were going to be taking an offensive lineman at 10, right?
Yeah, I would have
That
been
was
mad
their
if they didn't.
main Right. That was their main need. They needed three new starters. It's not outlandish to expect your first round rookie lineman to start, right? So everyone just kind of assumed, hey, we'll get a starter right there. We'll add a couple other guys in free agency and we'll roll. All of a sudden, the Jets signed John Simpson. They trade for Morgan Moses and they signed Tyron Smith. So folks are kind of sitting there saying, hey, we don't need to take a lineman anymore. Sure, we can. If you want to add depth, go for it. I spent basically all day, maybe, yesterday before the Mike Williams stuff happened and the day before, fully prepared to come sit on this podcast and be like, listen, you certainly can't still take an offensive lineman, but in my opinion, this Jets receiver room needs help. It needs a lot of work. None of these available free agents are really going to move the needle. And I was going to sit here and pound the table for them taking a receiver there at that pick. Um, and then what do? They sign Mike Williams, and all of a sudden they solidify that wide receiver spot. It's not a day one need that you're going to need to have filled. So all of a sudden, you go from thinking 100% O line to, hey, probably wide receiver is what I would want the most, to now truly I'm sitting here like, you guys take it any which way you want to go, and I'm probably going to be fine with it because I do, like I said before, we should keep adding offensive linemen. Morgan Moses and Tyron Smith are on 1 year deals. Mike Williams is on a 1 year deal. Like you can obviously add this depth still, add a high pick, and I don't think that's absurd, but you're no longer relying on this guy to come in and make an impact right away, really, regardless of where you take him. And so that really opens things up for the Jets because, they can really take that full best player available approach, or they can look to move down and add more picks. We currently don't have a second rounder, right? And I'm kind of fine to just like let Joe Douglas go for it and whatever he thinks is best, like I'll be cool with. But it does really like open up the possibilities in a lot of crazy ways.
Yeah, that's exactly the point. There are so many options, and you really can't get mad at either way what they do. If you go and you draft Rome Odunze and you say we're just gonna have a trio of receivers at 10 with Garrett Wilson, Mike Williams, and Rome Odunze, and we're just gonna let Aaron Rodgers fucking cook. That's what his best wide receiver trio he's had maybe in his NFL career.
Yeah,
Odunze
I
has to
mean,
hit, but he's always had Devontae, but it's been Devontae and supporting cast. It's never been Devontae, really good wide
was
receiver
Devontae ever
too.
with Jordy? Yeah, like that's
I
all.
don't
Like I'm
think
trying to think
there.
if there
I
was
think
any
if there was
overlap
any
there.
overlap, it was Jordy at the
It's
end
like
when
that
it
last
wasn't
year.
Jordy
Yeah,
anymore. But I don't even know if
yeah,
there was a season where they overlapped. But to me, that combination, you're like, okay, that's great because if Mike Williams does leave after 1 year, you've got a young wide receiver that is a top 10 player in this class. If you want to go and take an offensive tackle, that's the one position that you're like, okay, he's probably not going to see the field as much. But like you said, two tackles that are both kind of in 1 year deals, also in their early to mid 30s, you eventually are going to need a replacement at
yeah. And
either or
what
both
you
of
think
those
you're gonna get through
positions.
the year with no injuries?
No, it's gonna
Like
happen. You're the New
someone's
York
getting
Jets.
injured.
It's
Yeah,
gonna happen. I saw it was like the only two things that could take down the Jets 2024 season. It was Nathaniel Hackett and the Jets turf. And it's like
the
kind of
MetLife
true.
turf.
Kind of true.
Yeah.
So,
But
you
honestly,
go,
like any team, right? Like
yeah. Exactly. It's not
Injuries are
just a
going to
Jets thing.
happen, right?
Yep.
Like, and I don't know. I'd honestly be fine taking an offensive lineman there.
Same here. And then you could also say Brock Bowers, tight end. Look, I like Tyler Conklin. Brock Bowers is a different kind of dude. He's a different cat.
No, sure.
He's a slot wide receiver. He's an inline guy. He's played out wide. He's played in the backfield. He is like a chess piece that, to me, I get a little disappointed because I worry about Nathaniel Hackett finding a way to utilize such a special guy like that. But it's Aaron Rodgers that's the offensive coordinator, so it's okay. Aaron
Sure.
Rodgers will know what to do with him. But he is a freak talent, and yes, drafting a tight end that early is kind of risky. Kyle Pitts was at pick 4, hasn't really panned out. Sometimes it does. More often than not, it's a position that takes a few years to develop. So maybe you don't get the instant gratification from taking Brock Bowers next season, but a very special player and a guy capable of being a top tight end in the league. So you could stay there. You very well could and just take one of those guys. I
Real
feel like
quick on Brock
yeah, go ahead
Bowers.
with Brock because we should talk him.
It's just an interesting idea now because last week we were just like, there's just no way, right? There's too many holes. And me personally, like I'll just admit it, like I definitely have some bias toward like taking a tight end at pick 10. It just feels a little wrong and feels like, is that really all the value that we're gonna get? But I mean, if he is this elite player that's really going to be a game changer, and people look at Kyle Pitts. I think Kyle Pitts has been all right. He's dealt with bad quarterback play. He's dealt with Arthur Smith, who just wants to throw the ball to other tight ends for some reason. Um, I don't think it's out of like the realm of possibilities that he'll end up, really catching his hitting the ground and starting to be pretty good. But yeah, I'm definitely like open to Brock Bowers if that's what they feel the best player available is. Because that whole idea of these changing tight ends, right? Where yeah, he's a tight end, but if he can also go out and play slot and help you in the blocking game, like all these different things, it does, provide value for sure. You think about what adding a pass catcher, a receiver does, if Brock Bowers is really all that good, fuck it, go take him. Um,
He's a chess piece.
I think
He's
yeah,
he's a
100%.
do it
And
all.
and I think when you look at any of these picks, right, whether it is O-line or receiver or tight end, you know, that big point that we keep hitting on is they're not going to be relied on right away. Even the way that like Garrett Wilson, right? Like Garrett Wilson really did have to just come in and obviously, he wasn't getting a ton of playing time. I think his first 2 games, then he come in, it was pretty clear he was the best. Um, he was expected to be great from day one. We needed him to be our number one wide receiver, basically. Whoever we take here, we're not going to need that. And I think that's also just another reason why trading back becomes such an intriguing option. Because if you say, all right, hey, maybe I'm not going to get a top 10 player, but can I get a top 25, 30 player and add picks, add a second, really just give myself more dart throws to take in this really, pretty deep receiver draft, pretty deep offensive lineman draft. Like if you get a second round wide receiver, you'll probably be pretty confident that that guy's going to be an impactful player, right? And change your game and be able to, again, doesn't have to start day one, but can grow into it. I definitely just think like their opportunities are endless. And if you can trade back and add picks, it really kind of, you can see like the depth and the needs of this team really filling out in a way that necessarily we didn't have last year. Last year, it felt like we had good starters and then it was a lot of questions. This year, it feels a little bit more established when you just look at the roster as a whole.
There's so many things that have built toward this being not just deeper, but I it is the deepest offensive
We're in
line
overtime, by
draft
the way.
class. Nice. Okay. Well, not nice, but it's not just that it's a deep class, it's the deepest offensive line class of the last decade. And wide receiver, you could argue probably just about the same. There might be one other year that you could argue it's deeper. Um, I was listening to Todd McShay talk about this. Good friend of Joe Douglas, by the way, so I'm pretty sure they're sharing thoughts here. But Todd McShay was basically saying that in college football a decade ago, everybody started copycatting the spread offense. And what that meant is you weren't really focusing on physical offensive line play, smash mouth football. And that's why
Zone blocking
offensive line
schemes.
plays kind of fell out of, offensive prospects on the line really weren't as strong over the last decade. Obviously, there's good guys, but not a lot of depth to it, not a lot of meat on the bone. Then Lincoln Riley comes around and he reestablishes that, but in a newer age of the physical offensive line, but we're also still going to be flashy on the outside. And so coaches go to Lincoln Riley every offseason and they're like, what are you doing? How are you doing this? What's your offensive line philosophy? And that has taken fold over college football again. So now offensive line play has gotten back to being the physical, more dominant up front, to also coincide with the fact that because of NIL, because of the transfer portal, guys are staying around in college for longer now. So you've got this draft class where now everybody's kind of in there. You got a lot of fourth year, fifth year guys that are finally hitting. Some had those COVID years, so they've been playing longer. And you also have this
Yeah.
reestablished
Yeah.
brand of physical football. The offensive line depth in this class is the best in a decade plus, not to mention wide receivers. There's going to be 5 to 6 guys in the first round and probably another 7 to 8 in the second round taken. That's how good of a, like, those are the positions. So to me, I'm all aboard Joe Douglas sitting there, trading back. Say you take offensive line or wide receiver, best player available in the late teens, early 20s. And then if you pick up a pick in the 40s, just go with the opposite. Just get one of each and say, we know that you're going to be a good quality starter, but you don't have to be right away. We've got time. You can ease into your NFL career and we can
Yeah.
mold you. We can have Tyron Smith mentor you. We can have Mike Williams and Garrett Wilson mentor you. Like, we can build this forward. Now, you need a trade partner. Takes two to tango. At 10, you have to hope that there are enough quality players available that a team is willing to then give up that capital. Quarterbacks, they're going in the top 5 these days. There's not going to be a quarterback at pick 10 that guys are going to be trading up for. It's either you're in the top 5 or you're at the end of round 1 so that you can pick up that 5th-year option. So you have to hope that a team wants to jump Denver for an edge rusher or cornerback, or jump Vegas for another position player. You have to hope that somebody wants Rome Odunze and is willing to jump a few teams to get him. So that's where you get a little bit worrisome if the offer is going to show up. But if it's there, I think that's the obvious move for Joe Douglas to make almost a month from now.
Yeah. And it obviously depends on who's there, right? Like if they love Odunze and he's sitting there, if that, the second best tackle is still on the board, things like that. Maybe you see them just go ahead and make the pick. But yeah, I mean, I think that the big takeaway, like we keep saying, is that the options are open. And I'd like to quickly, just maybe potentially to wrap this up, ask you a question. We talked last week, I believe, maybe the week before, about where we feel the Jets would take a quarterback, right, in this draft. And we both were pretty solid, like day 3, rounds 5, 6, 7. That's when we could see it, just because it feels like there's so many needs. You can't really waste one of those early picks. Now, with, the way that we've handled the last week, the idea of trading back, like, it does kind of jump into my mind of, hey, maybe we are taking a day 2 quarterback. I still don't think we'd take a guy in the first round. But maybe a round 2 or 3 quarterback could be in play. Like, do you have thoughts to that? Do you have a reaction to that? Would that piss you off? What would your mindset be there?
I thought about it today as well too when we were thinking about, like, when I just building out this doc and talking about the draft. I was like, would they be more inclined to, if they can get a pick in the 40s or the high 30s, would you go and then just take, whether it's a Michael Penix Jr. or a Bo Nix, 2 guys that'll probably
Bo
end up
Nix,
outside
yeah.
of the first round? I came up in my head at that same time with the perfect conclusion to some of the bullshit the
Okay,
Jets had to
perfect
deal with
conclusion.
last year. There was big beef between Nathaniel Hackett and Sean Payton. And the most obvious draft rumor this entire process that in the second round, the Broncos want Bo Nix. To me, the chef's kiss is the Jets just
Let's
maybe do
go.
a little bit
Let's
of a jump
go.
on a trade back where they're like a pick or 2 ahead of Denver and they steal Bo Nix from Sean Payton. To
That
me, that would be
would be
just like,
awesome.
because they have no quarterback right now. They've got Jarrett Stidham. Like, their plan is to
They need
go
a
get
quarterback.
Bo Nix. And Sean Payton loves Bo Nix. Like that, he's not going to take him in the first round, but he would in the second. And like, to me, if they were going to do it, that would be to what would make me happiest, just to see the Jets get one more up. They got the win already. So that was, we beat them week 5, week 6 last season. So that felt good enough. After he kind of shat on Nathaniel Hackett and all that. And look, Nathaniel Hackett might have deserved a little bit of that. So I'm not going to say that, he's not
Yeah.
at fault for what went wrong in Denver there. But after you heard kind of
He's
him
still a
come out,
douchebag though
oh, he's a
for
huge
act for
douchebag.
saying that publicly. Like
Exactly.
what a you know what I mean? Like in the coaching, whatever you want to call it, like the boys club or whatever,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
just kind of a dirtbag move.
So to me, that would be the perfect ending to that entire fiasco is to steal the guy that Sean Payton has not hid well for the last month or so that he wants to be his next quarterback in
Yeah,
Denver. So I it's it's not a crazy idea. It's not like Tyrod is a young guy that you're like, oh, he'll be the heir apparent to Aaron Rodgers. Like you do need to get a younger guy in at some point, and all the other ones have moved around. Drew Lock is in New York, Sam Howell's in Seattle. All those guys are already moved. Justin Fields is now in Pittsburgh. So yeah, if you're looking at it and fuck, the thing is with Bo and Penix, who both probably end up in the second round, they're not more of that draft and develop guy. Like obviously they're probably you
sure.
can still develop them. There's not like there's
But they're
nothing there,
old.
but they're old, They're not like
Yeah,
an investment plan like some guys maybe later would be. I would probably just rather not. I'd probably rather just
yeah,
go wide receiver offensive line in round 2. That would be my preference, but I do like the storyline at least and the
sure.
dramatic effect that would go to stealing Bo Nix from Denver.
Yeah, I would still think the second round's a little early. I'd probably
Yeah.
be more looking for like them to take a guy later, maybe in the
They
third
they've
round.
got
I'd start to
they've
warm up
got
to the idea.
pick 72 in round 3. So they do have a pick that is
Yeah,
somewhat early in the third round where you're still in
early.
Michael Pratt, Spencer Rattler range.
Yeah, which would be interesting, and there wouldn't be any pressure on that guy, but it would open up that opportunity for it to just be like a wasted pick or on a guy who never plays. I do think just the interesting dynamic about it too is like it's no secret that Joe Douglas and Robert Saleh are coaching for their jobs, right?
Yeah.
And or are playing for their jobs. And just that idea of like skipping on someone who can maybe help you more immediately to take someone in the future is a big gamble of, hey, we think this shit's going to work. And, hey, maybe that's a good thing, right? That they're showing confidence and they believe in themselves. Like, go for it. But it's no guarantee, right, that they're going to be sticking around after this year. So it would be a little bit, I guess, jarring to just see them be willing to say, hey, we're going to go and take this player who realistically won't even touch the field for 2 more years. Um, so yeah, interesting dynamic.
Yeah.
It'll just be, it seems pretty clear the Jets are going to be taking a quarterback. I think it's just one of the funner questions. It's just where,
Where?
does it end up being a six rounder or do they go a little bit early and kind of surprise people?
Yeah.
I think that'll be fun. So yeah, man, eventful week.
Yeah, very very eventful week and we're about a month away from the draft, so I definitely think we can start looking at positions and guys and
Sure.
necessarily who might be best scheme fits for the offense or scheme fits on defense for Salah because there is going to be a guy. That was the only thing I thought that I wouldn't like personally is if we sat at 10 and took the best available edge. And there are 3 edge rushers that are like first round talents, Lai Tulatu out of UCLA. There is Dallas Turner from Alabama and Jared Verse from Florida State. It would just be very funny to be like, oh, well, we got rid of all those needs. So let's just go get
We're
another
just
edge
taking
rusher
an
in the
edge
first
rusher
round.
again.
Like that to me,
Yeah.
the one where I'd be like,
Yeah.
okay, I get it if you think best player available, but come on, we keep doing this. We're gonna keep drafting first round edges. That's not exciting.
Yeah. If they do keep the pick, I don't know which I'd prefer more. Like, I almost want to say offensive lineman. I'd still prefer them most
Yeah,
just because
me too.
feeling like you had a little bit of security, right? Where if you have an injury at tackle and then you can just throw in a guy who was a top 10 pick who you pretty believe in, like
Yeah.
that would be good. I do also think like if you're sitting there at 10, there's probably going to be really good receivers on the board, and first round receivers just are a pretty safe bet. And like
Yeah.
the selfish part of me is like, just go take one and let him be awesome.
Well,
Um, but
and
yeah, Edgewood, I guess I'd be a little annoyed as well.
and at least with the offensive line, and I know we just spent talking about how it's nice not having to rely on somebody from day one, but it would be kind of crazy in a make or break year to have the 10th overall pick and take a guy that may not see the field at all. Whereas if you take a wide
Sure.
receiver, you can say a
He can at
three-wide
least,
set, he is going to be on the field. Like Jackson Smith and Jigba
yeah,
last year, he
yeah,
worked his way into being alongside DK and Tyler Lockett. You can make that argument for a
fair.
wide receiver and making an impact in year one. Offensive line, you'd almost need something to go wrong for him to be on the field at this point. So there's I think I would rather wide receiver or tight end if they stay there. Trade back, I'd be fine with O-line, and then wide receiver day two, I think is where. But hey, we've got a month to go. There's going to be more trades that happen
Yeah,
between
we'll dive
now.
in.
Minnesota will jump up to take a quarterback. So whether it's LA picking behind us at 11 or whoever turns out being there, there's gonna be a lot of fun stuff. We can get more draft focus these next few pods, which will be really exciting. So yeah, that'll wrap things up for today. Thank you for listening to
Yeah,
another episode. Yeah, give us the
real
gambling
quick before
update,
you do the
Theodore.
outro, we got
Go ahead.
16 seconds left. Montana State just hit a 3, but Grambling's up 5, so we'll probably at least win our bets. But it's looking like Grambling's going to come away with the win here, so congrats to them.
Yeah.
Yeah, Blake and I 1-0 on the day. Shout out us.
Shout out us. Shout out Rado. We're gonna ride Rado tonight and hopefully be 2-0.
Yep, let's go. Deion Sanders.
Yes, prime time. Thank you.
He coaches their basketball team too, right?
He is. Yeah, he got paid to, probably.
Two-sport coach.
Yeah, he got paid
for sure.
enough to coach all those teams there. All right, thank you guys so much for listening. We'll talk to you next week. Peace.